God. God.
Come on! This is the desperate prayer a studio executive makes when they ask an audience to suspend disbelief. In 1994, the prayers of the suits at 20th Century Fox were answered with the $121 million box office smash hit Speed. Instead of calling shenanigans, audiences cheered Keanu and America's future sweetheart launching a city bus over a 50-foot gap in a highway. So today on Art of the Scene, we're turning public transpo into Superman, as we floor it into the action 90s when men were men. Sandra Bullock was a black man, that'll make sense later, and stunts were performed live instead of CGI'd. Assume the crash position, because this week on Art of the Scene, we're ramping into the Speed bus jump. Before we go any further, we here at CineFix promise to mercifully spare you a deep dive into this type of explanation. Theta equals 0.5 times sine raised to the inverse of gravity times range divided by launch velocity squared. That is one of myriad physics breakdowns of the plausibility of jumping a city bus over the gap. For some reason, this stunt, more than nearly any other in the history of cinema, sends science wonks across the internet into a tizzy. Hundreds of armchair Einsteins have YouTubed, blogged, message boarded, Tumblred, and live journaled their breakdowns of whether or not a 40-foot bus could cover the 50-foot leap racing along at 69 miles per hour. They delve into the Newtonian equations, rotational velocity, even the tensile strength of the undercarriage of the bus. But here's the thing. Speed is a movie about a bomb being strapped to the bottom of a bus that will explode if the speedometer dips below 50 miles per hour. So,
pop quiz, hotshot.
Do you want to spend the rest of the week calculator mashing the permutations of an absurd 90s action movie scenario like a discount Neil deGrasse Tyson, or do you want to explore the psychological trickery behind crafting a cinematic adrenaline surge?
Do not attempt to grow a brain.
That's a little harsh, Dennis, but point taken. The originating creative spark for Speed was 1985's Runaway Train, a largely forgettable movie originally written by one of the greatest directors of all time, Akira Kurosawa. Speed's screenwriter, Graham Yost, was under the mistaken impression that Kurosawa's train had a bomb aboard, and thus conceptualized his bus movie as such. Yost initially took Speed to Paramount, who wanted John McTiernan of Die Hard, Predator, and The Hunt for Red October to direct. However, McTiernan declined, citing that he felt it was too much of a Die Hard knockoff.
Stupid Hans.
McTiernan suggested Jan de Bont take the helm. De Bont stepped on, and Paramount stepped off. De Bont and Yost then took the project to Fox. The suits at 20th Century expressed the same reason for passing as Paramount. They didn't think audiences would buy a ticket to spend 2 hours stuck on a bus. De Bont and Yost quickly schemed up 2 additional action sequences. An opening sequence in an elevator inspired by the time Jan de Bont got stuck in one during the filming of Die Hard, and a climactic runaway train sequence inspired by the 1976 film Silver Streak. With those additions, Fox climbed aboard.
Pop quiz, hotshot.
Who was the first choice for the lead role of Jack Traven? The answer? Stephen Baldwin. Yes, one of the bargain bin Baldwin brothers. He declined the role as he also felt the script too closely resembled Die Hard, and he didn't want to be a poor man's John McClane. In a career chock-a-block with questionable artistic choices, this was likely the worst. Even worse than playing Barney Rubble in The Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas. After watching Point Break, Jan de Bont cast Keanu Reeves because he felt the cool breeze was not threatening to men because he's not that bulky and looks great to women. But Keanu also had misgivings about the script, feeling that it was coming off as Die Hard mixed with some kind of screwball comedy. After training with the LAPD on Point Break, Keanu wanted to portray Jack Traven as less of a wisecracking maverick and more of an earnest detective with an abiding concern for human life. De Bont brought on Joss Whedon a week before principal photography to rewrite the character to Keanu's more humanist liking, which kinda worked.
All right, pop quiz. Airport, gunman with one hostage. He's using her for cover. He's almost to a plane.
Shoot the hostage.
Okay, so maybe the concern for human life wasn't totally prioritized in the reshaping of Reeves' character, but Joss Whedon's signature wit shouldered out nearly all of Graham Yost's clunky original chatter. Last but not least, there was the issue of casting the woman who was actually going to drive the bus and serve as the comic relief sidekick to Keanu's Jack. So de Bont scoured young Hollywood and came up with the obvious choice: Ellen DeGeneres! No, really, that's who they originally had in mind for the part. Remember, this was 1993. Ellen didn't come out publicly on her sitcom until 1997. Stephen Baldwin and Ellen DeGeneres in Speed actually could have happened. It could have happened. But of course, they tapped a rising star from Demolition Man instead, the ever-beloved Sandra Bullock. Now, you may be asking yourself why we're spending so much time discussing cast and screenplay when analyzing how to get an audience to suspend disbelief enough to buy a bus jumping across a gap in a highway. Well, this is why. Jay Leno and Pat Morita, aka Mr. Miyagi, on the back of a motorcycle rocketing into the middle of an F1 race in 1989's overturned cinematic outhouse, Collision Course. The chemistry is so non-existent between the characters, the comedy so forced, and the premise so dull that any and every stunt comes off as a pitiful attempt to put Revlon on a hideously ugly pig. That is to say, a causally necessary component of getting an audience to suspend disbelief is having them fully bought in before you make the ask. Just think of hundreds of stormtroopers firing lasers, not once hitting Luke, Han, Leia, or Chewie. When you're rooting for likable characters, you're mentally primed to overlook that it's patently absurd to dodge thousands of laser beams. There's even a name for this psychological phenomenon: the halo effect. The halo effect is a cognitive bias in which a positive or negative impression of something influences the observer's thoughts and feelings about the intrinsic properties of the object of observation. In layman's terms, if you think someone's a babe, you're more likely to think they're smart and nice too.
Some people out there in our nation don't have maps, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as.
Alright, not always. Still, this means that every time you've suspended disbelief in a movie, it's not because the filmmakers have presented a plausible scenario. It's because you're having so much fun with your new on-screen buddos that your brain tricks itself.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
So now that we've established why it's imperative to get your cast and script right to create a halo effect to suspend disbelief, let's suspend a bus. To review, the premise of Speed is a lunatic former bomb squad officer played by Dennis Hopper rigs a bomb on a bus that will go off if the bus dips below 50 miles an hour. LA SWAT officer Jack Traven boards the bus and must outwit the bomber while simultaneously getting the bus to perform automotive gymnastics in order to save the lives of the passengers aboard, including Sandra Bullock and evidently Medea. For the shoot, a fleet of a dozen buses were put to work. Different buses were modified for different shots. Most had a stunt driver riding atop the bus working a special steering wheel, while Sandra spun her fake one on the inside. Additionally, the inside was cut out of one for shooting interiors, another had the windshield removed and a platform built in front of the bus, another was used just for the underneath photography, one was strictly for high-speed scenes, two were blown up, and of course there was one completely stripped-down lightweight bus designated for the jump scene, which had to be done over after the stunt driver missed the ramp and totaled it, a fact DeBont and crew hid from the studio.
Show's over, nothing to see here. Show's, oh my god, a horrible
Bus
crash.
Most of the freeway scenes in the film were shot at the Stack interchange between the 105 and 110 in Los Angeles, close to the University of Southern California. According to legend, during scouting, DeBont noticed missing sections of road and told Yost to add the bus jump to the script. However, there was no missing road whatsoever during the actual shooting of the scene because that would have been insane, even by Hollywood stuntman standards. In fact, during the establishing shot of the missing bridge section, you can see the shadow from the piece they digitally painted out. Stunt coordinator Gary Himes was coming off the immense undertaking of Jurassic Park when he signed on to do Speed. It was a fitting choice as he raced cars in his spare time. Additionally, he was possibly the one coordinator who could pull off the bus stunt for a disturbingly violent reason. Without the use of his recently developed proprietary safety harness, the stunt driver, subbing in for Sandra Bullock as the driver, Joffrey Brown, would likely compress his spine upon landing the jump and snap his back in half. By the way, this is what we meant earlier about that time Sandra Bullock was a black man. So totally normal stuff here. Surprisingly, Joffrey's number one concern wasn't injuring his vertebrae. It was having any of the camera's rigging or pieces of metal framework come detached and impaling him. So next time you're complaining about your job or how hot it is in the VO booth, just think of Joffrey. After 2 weeks of rehearsal, it was time to jump a bus. The ramp was built, which is why you can actually see the wood in the final cut, and the passengers were evacuated, which is why you can't actually see them in the final cut. Paramedics and firefighters were on hand. There were 5 cameras, 4 manned. Jan de Bont instructed his crew that if he saw a single element of the stunt that seemed to miss, he would yell, "Leave, leave, leave!" and everyone was to evacuate. And with that, Joffrey put the pedal to the metal from a mile away. The bus's intended speed was 69 miles an hour, but they only reached 61. Still, when it hit the ramp, the bus's nose skied higher and flew farther than expected, a full 109 feet. This was problematic as it landed directly atop one of the cameras, crushing it. crushed it. On the plus side, at least it was the unmanned camera. The bus was absolutely destroyed upon landing, blowing out wheels and shredding the undercarriage. But it didn't matter. The second time was the charm. DeBont had gotten the coverage that he needed to toss it to his visual effects supervisor, Ron Brinkman. Brinkman's team's task was to digitally paint out the highway with matte layers and create the gap. In the movie, Keanu says the jump is 50 feet long, but DeBont and company soon realized that on screen, it scanned as teeny tiny. So they increased the visual perception of the gap to 177 feet. Still, if the stunt were merely portrayed on screen for the actual time the bus was in the air, it would have been laughably dull. In order to augment the psychological impact and expand the duration of the stunt, DeBont and his editor John Wright used two tricks. The first, of course, is slow-mo. The second was a trick first mainstreamed by the Chinese action cinema of Jackie Chan. Jackie famously did all of his own stunts, often breaking body parts in the process. As such, he maximized the value of him risking life and limb by having multiple cameras shoot each stunt from different angles, and then replaying the stunt from said angles. John Wright didn't go full Police Story and replay the stunt in full multiple times, but he did elongate the perceived duration of the stunt by piecing together footage from the 4 not destroyed cameras in overlapping sections. The final result creates the psychological illusion of the bus being aloft for 11 seconds instead of the real-life 0.49. Yeah, that's definitely not nearly as cool. For this and his other kinetic editing on Speed, Wright received an Academy Award nomination. So, to make a long bus jump short, the trick of suspending an audience's disbelief isn't to have your stunt team zoom a bus off a ramp on a highway at 61 miles per hour and not have all your cameras get smashed. It's to psychologically warp the audience's perceived space-time with a halo effect and sly editing. You don't have to construct an impossible reality. You need to construct an audience mind state where they'll construct an impossible reality. Unfortunately, today's many special effects movies rely on constructing the impossible reality via computers instead of psychological trickery, leading to a lack of audience buy-in to the stunts. This isn't to poo-poo CGI, but rather to call out directors who think that because you've shown it to the audience has felt it. It's what separates the Inceptions from the Percy Jacksons today, and what separated the Speeds from the, well, whatever god-awful monstrosity this is. Ugh. Now that you know more about the bus jump and Speed than you really ever needed to, let us know in the comments who you think are the best working directors at using CGI to build a believable world for characters to halo effect, instead of just having their computers hurl bombastic VFX at your eyeballs. And we'll see you next time on Art of the Scene.